While we sleep, the guardians of the night take to the streets, having said goodbye to those they love. Each other knowing they may never say these words again, they face the evil that we run from. They dedicate their lives to those that would hate them because they wear the badge. They wear the badge not for the glory or recognition, but for the passion to help others. This is the LEO First Podcast. We'll talk to the men and women in law enforcement, those that have retired, those that keep the prisons secure, and anyone who's impacted by law enforcement. We'll peel back the curtain, and you'll get the real stories. The good, the bad, and the ugly. Every law enforcement officer has a story to tell. Get ready to hear from the men and women who put their lives on the line every day for their communities and their country. Welcome to the LEO First Podcast. Now, here's your host, Michael Laidler.
Hey everybody, it's Michael Laidler, the host of the LEO First Podcast. We are on another show, and it's always amazing because, as I was telling our guest that's on the show right now, this is my second podcast today. And the joy of having a podcast or even being on them is that we're able to share information, but we're able to record when we see fit in our schedules. So it's amazing to be able to be on here with you guys tonight. And I know you guys are in for a treat because our guest, he is a wealth of knowledge. He's been to a lot of trainings. He's actually in a role now where he does a lot of speaking for his agency. And just based on what I was able to read and some of the things that he wanted to talk about from the notes I read, I know you guys are going to be glued to however you're listening to this. And as you guys always know, we're really unscripted, and that's because we want to have a conversation that flows, and we want to make sure that whatever direction we go, it's natural. It's based on what we believe will benefit you guys, because the LEO First Podcast is about humanizing the badge. It's also about showing each and every one of you that a lot of us out here want to help. We want to make you better, whether it's being a better person, a better family member, a better employee, better follower, a better leader, whatever it is. We want to see you guys grow, and we want to see you guys push. But with all that said, I'm not going to delay any further, because in Texas it's 8. Over on the West Coast where he's at, it's 6. So we know it's about that time for dinner, and I don't want to mess up anybody's dinner plans. So we'll go ahead and get to our guest. He is a 27-year veteran. He's currently the assistant chief of police in Seattle. And that's just a small bit of his professional history, but I'll let him tell more. Tyrone Davis, tell us about who you are. What do you want to talk about tonight?
Oh, Michael, first of all, thanks for having me on the podcast. I really am happy to be here. I'm happy to have a conversation with you. I'm just excited about law enforcement, where we are now, and more importantly, where we need to go, being in a position to kind of, assist with, where we're going to be 5 years from now, 10 years from now in this industry, which I think we'll have to kind of change how we've done things in the past. And so, yeah, I just would like to share, I guess, my journey, how we got to, how I've gotten rather where I am today. And, like I said, just again, where we need to go moving forward. I think it starts for me. And it's kind of an interesting journey. And I think there's this reoccurring theme in my life of, having an idea of where life is going to take me and where I'm at. So if somebody had asked me, Michael, would you think you'd be an assistant chief of police as a young, 5-year-old, 10-year-old kid in New York City? I would say, yeah, that's crazy. And to be doing that job in Seattle, Washington. But, that's where I'm from. I'm originally from the Bronx, New York. I'm a product of a great mother and father. My mother is from the island of Jamaica, and my father is from Antigua. They moved here shortly after being married, and I spent the first 12 years of my life in New York City. It was just a great melting pot of different people. The area where I grew up in had a strong West Indian culture, and there was just a lot of things I learned growing up that way, whether it's the food, whether it's the how you learn and how certain things are done. Coming from two islands that were English Commonwealth type islands. It's a little bit different than the American culture, but still being able to actually come up in the Bronx as well and learn how and just like I said, just come of age rather. However, like thinking, like, I moved to New York. Correction, I moved to Houston, Texas in 1985. I was 12 years of age, and at that time, it was a booming area. A lot of the friends that I ended up developing and hanging out, ironically, were from New York City as well.
Wow.
The oil industry was heavy, and so you just had an influx of people that were not originally from Houston. I think a couple of my other buddies were from Chicago, Cleveland, so you just kind of had this influx of people moving into the area, and so it was just kind of an interesting time. If I go home now to Houston, I don't even recognize the place. It's grown so much. It's been one of those cities that's been the fastest growing cities for the last 30 years, and you see it, from the size of, we used to play basketball games in high school on roads that were 2 lanes with deer running across them. And now you go there and there's like a, you know, 10 lane highway, on that same roadway here, just 30, 40 years later. So it's very interesting to see how that area has developed. But I went to high school, and I would say probably around my senior year, I decided I wanted to get out of Houston. I wanted to travel, and I decided I would join the United States Navy. And that was, what kind of led me out of Houston. But before that, and I think what kind of really gave me the idea about entering law enforcement was kind of a weird story. I was riding my motorcycle. It was shortly after I graduated high school, so I'm 17, and I got pulled over by a state trooper. You kind of go through a highway where the speed limit's 55, and then you go through these little cities where it kind of drops down to 35. And I
Yep.
know, Michael, your background, you lived in the Texas area. On my way to Texas A&M, where my sister
Hmm.
was attending some sort of summer uh, classes, that was kind of in support of getting kids that were thinking about college. She's 3 years younger than me at the time, and I got pulled over by this trooper who was very nice. I pulled over. My parents at the time were following me in the car. They pull over, and I can explain to him what I was doing up there. And so he sat me down in this. I'm into cars, so it's a 19 uh, probably late 1980s Ford Mustang, with a 5 speed transmission, and
Nice.
it's air conditioning. Yeah. And this tall black man, he's fit, he's in shape, he's nice, he's professional. He seats me in the car rather in the passenger seat. And as we're seated there, he's just writing me a ticket. He's got some music on, and I'm like, well, I could do this all day. I could drive a Mustang 5.0, wear this cool uniform, and just kind of be out here driving on the road. And that was kind of the first time I really considered, hey, I might want to do this as a career. And so I spent 4 years in the military. Since I had a motorcycle, I wanted to take orders out to the state of California because that's a great place to have a motorcycle, and ended up in Bremerton, Washington. My ship was actually stationed. Bremerton, for those who are listening, is just outside of the Seattle area. It's about an hour's drive. But the ship was in dry dock at the time, and so that's why it was up there and not where I thought my orders were going to take me, which was in this case it was Alameda, California. There used to be a naval air station that was closed in the late 90s, but that's where my ship was stationed at the time. And so, after my I did my deployment. I did a couple of jobs. I worked as like a paralegal in a legal office for a couple of years, and then did one deployment during Operation Southern Watch in the Gulf, like in '93, '94, actually, where I did more see. I worked as an operations specialist where we did navigation, cryptology, a bunch of operational stuff related to our mission at the time, and decided probably halfway through my enlistment, I'm definitely going to come out and be a police officer. I know I didn't want to go back to Houston, and I didn't want to go back to New York and live with 11 million people. So at that time, I spent during my time in Washington State, I spent quite a bit of time in Seattle area and visited friends in Portland as well, and decided that's where I would settle, was Portland, Oregon. I moved to Portland, uh, and within a year, I was a deputy sheriff at the Washington County Sheriff's Office, which is a suburb of Portland, Oregon.
Wow.
At the time, I really enjoyed that agency. I still tell people to stay. It's probably the best job or one of the best jobs I've ever had. It was a great agency. But at the time, there wasn't really a whole lot going along in Portland for a New York City boy, where, at least Seattle, I didn't have to drive 3 hours to go watch a football game or just any major sporting event other than the Portland Trail Blazers. So, for me, it made sense for me to kind of continue my career in Seattle, and have kind of more options to have, during my spare time, and that's what brought me to the Seattle Police Department. And so that was a big part of my journey. I got here and I immediately enjoyed my time working in the department. When I got out of field training, I was assigned to our East Precinct, which is just a great place to come up as an officer, because it's one of the most diverse areas within the city. I mean, it's again a huge melting pot. We had part of our international district, so a lot of our Asian cultures. We have an area called Little Saigon that's in that area, in our Chinatown, that kind of was part of that district at the time. We had the Central District, which is more people that were African American, and
Hmm.
we had a hospital area. We had an area that had more well-to-do people. I mean, you name it, they were all encompassed in that precinct. And so, you just got a really well-rounded view of how you're going to serve the community, and address all those different needs. And I think that was kind of unique to that particular precinct at the time. Um, so I worked patrol. I spent 4 or 5 years, doing our community police team at the time. So we kind of focus on, really engaging the community, attending community meetings, kind of really getting to know the people in that area and what's important to them, and also just working on some long-term projects. And then I kind of started to kind of push towards a more proactive law enforcement role. So I served on our anti-crime team, where we kind of did more proactive, fun things. And then I decided, it's time for me to get promoted. And so I, I was promoted to be a sergeant. I thought I was going to go back to patrol and have a squad. And, lo and behold, I ended up getting assigned to um, our Office of Police Accountability, which is, what we call our, basically our internal investigations arm. And, I think that's one thing, again, it's just one of these themes that kind of came up where, I think, my career is going to take me one way. I get an assignment, initially I'm not happy about that assignment. And then it turns out to be just one of the best experiences, and that was the case with this assignment. Because, generally in law enforcement, people are reluctant to kind of work in that role. But what I found as a supervisor working there, you really get to learn the inner workings of the department. You get to interview officers. Some of the allegations and a lot of the work we did just really proved that the officers out there doing the right thing and doing their jobs. But you really learned how to look out for the officers that you're going to be supervising, and making sure that you're taking care of them. That if there's any concerns for their welfare or well-being, you kind of get ahead of that, because you can see some of these kind of early warning signs, maybe that could send somebody's career in the wrong direction. And so, I did that role for 3 or 4 years, and when I was finally moved out of that role and went back to patrol or into actually the detective unit, or as a detective sergeant for our
Mhm.
domestic violence unit, it was just a really valuable experience. And at the same time, I got to meet many of our officers that I interviewed, and so that was just a great and valuable um, experience. And that's one of the things that I always encourage many of our sergeants, if they have an opportunity to go and work that role, to do it, because you'll learn a great deal. You'll learn a lot more about the inner workings of the department, and you'll be able to support your people and take care of them. And so, um, after being a sergeant detective for 3 years and doing a great job, or enjoying a great job rather, with the domestic violence unit, I was promoted to lieutenant. And so through my time as a lieutenant, I just really got to work back in patrol, which was a great assignment. At that point, I hadn't been in patrol in almost 7 years. And it was great to just be back with the officers and serve in the community. And this time it was in our South Precinct, which was just a great experience. And now we're talking 2021, and our department had been through a number of things, particularly that summer of 2020 with the riots. And
Mhm.
it was great to be back in patrol, working with the officers, many of who, were, affected by, the work that they had to deal with
Right.
during that time frame, which is a stressful time for many of them. And, just keeping them positive and enjoying the job they're doing and focusing on why they were there and why they were still happy to serve the community. And it was just a great experience to see their resilience. And just there was never a doubt that when the tones go off and there's an emergency, they would show up. And so that was a great experience for me. And then you know after doing that for a while, I was able to work as a lieutenant in our over and support our community service officers who are non-sworn um, officers. They work with the community. They deal with community engagement, and it's just really a great supporting cast of folks with a great deal of experiences that would really just work with assisting us with kind of being a bridge between the police officers and many of the community members. And that was a great experience until I you know applied for the assistant chief
Mhm.
position. And I've been in this role for a couple months now. So I've done a lot of things. I mean, I feel like I've been talking forever.
No, you're
There's
good.
a lot of things that were in that that I did, and a lot of secondary roles that I did as well. In terms of assisting our department with getting through our settlement agreement, and even some of the temporary assignments that I had during our time during the riots, which really gave me an opportunity to work with many of our commanders as an acting lieutenant during our special operations, where we had a special deployment at the time, uh, with in response to the riots that we kind of dealt with for several months. And that really was what started me on the path to leadership, and wanted to be in the position where I am today.
It's crazy how many things, and I know you said you talked a lot, but I mean you have a lot of experiences that need to be highlighted. And I tell people sometimes they're like, "Oh, I think I'm saying too much." No, you're telling you're even if you take 10, 15 minutes to tell me something, that's a lifetime, 27 years up to this point. And the last thing I ever want to do to anybody is minimize their story, because it's important, your story. Each of us have a story, and that was part of yours. Now, it was mostly on the professional side, and we know, and we may be able to touch on some things that's happened during that 27-year period, but it's part of the story of what makes us who we are. And it's important for people to know who they're listening to, who they're looking up to. I mean, you serve in a big role in a big agency that's gone through a lot. So I know just from my 18 years of law enforcement experience that you've been through some things. No matter, even if you were that officer that's been on the midnight shift working 6P to 6A or 12P to 8A, where you think you don't see anything, you still see a lot. In 27 years, you're going to see a lot of different things. So it's cool to hear how many opportunities you've had to have. One thing that I want to kind of go back to, and it got me excited just hearing about it, was your first pretty much memory of what got you to law enforcement. A lot of people don't really know what kind of started them on that path. And for you, it sounds like it was a life pivot. Like that experience with a positive police officer actually drove you into the field. And that's what we want. We want to have law enforcement officers, which I would say, and this is a number, there's probably a real statistic out there, but, and Michael Laitler said 95% of people in the law enforcement industry are good officers. They're good supervisors. They mean well. But, there's 5% that's out there that's doing their own thing for whatever reason, and they're motivated in the wrong ways. But you were fortunate enough to experience one of those 95% of officers in the industry. And your story is so cool that you were able to experience law enforcement on that side. Now, prior to that time, did you have a lot of experience with law enforcement, or was it just nothing that was ever directly impacted you from it?
No, Michael, I did not. I think at that time, my goal was to be an attorney. I wanted to be a prosecutor. Don't really know where that came from, but that's kind of where I wanted to be. And, after having a positive experience with that Texas State Trooper, that was the first time again that I thought about that job. And then when I went in the military, if you got to remember at that time, one of my favorite TV shows was Cops. That's kind of right around the time that Cops first came out.
Yes.
And and so that was a ritual that myself and a lot of my friends in the military would watch. And I kind of really shifted on, okay, I know I care about people. I know I want to serve and I want to make a positive impact. But maybe I don't want to do that behind the desk or in a courtroom. Maybe I'd actually like to be out with the community. And so that really, accelerated my idea of really wanting to serve and do that. And so, yeah, no, it's not a lot of cops have, cops that were in their family in the past. I don't have that. But that was my path. And ironically, my sister, who I mentioned earlier, she is a retired police sergeant. Served,
Nice.
She worked at the Sugar Land Police Department. Her
Right up
path
the
was
road.
different. She worked security at a major hospital and in the Houston area where a lot of cops worked off duty. And so through those friendships, that kind of got her thinking about law enforcement and, served her well in her adulthood. She was very successful as a police sergeant. So, yeah, that's kind of how I got into it. And it's just ironic that my sister and I did the same job.
It's funny because one of the things that the time you started law enforcement was the time I realized I wanted to do it. There was an incident, and all the viewers that listen to my show, they know what I'm going to bring up because I remember the first time I became interested in law enforcement. There was something in June of 1994 in California. Just by me saying that, does it ring a bell at all to you?
It's probably Rodney King,
A little
or
bit
was
after
that
that.
after that? Or I'm talking about the OJ
Yes,
incident?
yes,
Yes,
yes.
yes.
That was all Michael Laitler needed to want to be in law enforcement. So it's funny how certain experiences lead us in certain directions. And like I said, that's why I love the fact that you were able to pinpoint yours because a lot of people that I've talked to, or not even just interview on the podcast, they struggle with finding that first situation, which is fine. You don't have to, but I know for me, it was that OJ Simpson trial. It was the gloves, it was the chase, it was all the conflicting testimony. All I knew that by the end of that case, I knew I wanted to be a homicide detective in LA. I knew that's what I wanted to do in my life. Now, that did drive me to study law enforcement or criminal justice in high school. Then I started my degree in criminal justice when I was going to Florida State at 18. And then fortunately, my sister was a dispatcher in Tallahassee. And she brought an application home and said, hey, they're hiring, you qualify. So I just went out on a limb, which ultimately led to me starting as a police officer at 19. But all of that started back with the OJ Simpson trial, just similar to yours. It was an experience that fortunately it was good. I've heard other people tell me experiences that made them want to change law enforcement. You're like, hey, no, if I can get me a 1980s Ford Mustang, hey, I'm gonna win. It was just cool to hear that. So when you're dealing now as an assistant chief, obviously you're not first line supervisor, you're not really middle management. I would say at that level you're considered executive level, C-suite, CEO level, because if the chief's out, you're next in line. And everybody views you guys as the same. So in your path to leadership, I know you've been in a role shortly, or haven't been in a role for that long. How has it been just for the last few months, seeing another level of leadership now? Because now you're supervising who were your peers before, but now you're at almost the highest level at your HC. How has that transition been?
It's been very interesting. Real quick, a little bit of our command structure. So we have our chief of police, we have a deputy chief who's second in command, and we have 5 assistant chiefs that cover the 5 bureaus that are currently within our department. And so, you know, it's been interesting. I feel like the big thing was, going back to 2020 during the riots. Many I was working as an acting lieutenant and kind of in charge of our night operations during the riots in our command center. And so I got to work with many of the current command staff members during that time, and it was such a stressful time. Um, but I think with that experience and just dealing with them day in day out during that time, they got to see who I was and I got to see who they were and trust them. So now that this opportunity has come up and I actually applied for the assistant chief job, didn't expect to get it, was kind of really just pursuing this for practice, thinking maybe I'm 3 years away from this.
Yeah.
And I end up getting the job. um, it was surprising. I mean, I definitely feel like I was prepared for it. So to answer your question, the dynamic of it is really just dealing with budgets. As a special operations bureau assistant chief, I have units, for example, that have really expensive equipment. My bureau has SWAT, our harbor unit, our arson bomb squad, um, a hostage negotiation team. So a lot of the equipment that they use to keep people safe and respond to these critical incidents are very expensive items. There's lots of challenges in terms of um, getting funds for those items. There's some federal funding, but there's nuance in terms of, how to get those items funded. And so, a lot of the job honestly has been just figuring out the financial part, the administrative part, all the rules that are associated with that. Those are all things that as a patrol lieutenant, I didn't really have to deal with very much. Through my time as a community service officer lieutenant, I started to touch on some of that work, so it wasn't a huge leap for me. But it that's the big part of the job, is really just making sure I'm getting all my folks the equipment that they need. And then the other part is, those people that I did have those relationships with in 2020 who are part of our command staff now. Just making sure that I'm working well with them. I'm not stepping on toes, which but I'm still taking care of my people, and we're still having the conversations we need to have to complete the mission.
If you were talking to Tyrone Davis from 1996 that was starting in Washington County, and he asked you how important is relationship building, what would you tell him?
I think in 1996, if I was talking to him, I'd tell him, look, you really have to start working in that arena. And it's something that I was very comfortable with, as a sheriff's deputy at the time.
Mhm.
If there was a community meeting or a national night out or one of those events, our sheriff's office is really good about sending our deputies out. And I enjoyed that. I enjoyed interacting with the community and having those positive experiences. Going back to, my time with that trooper, on the side of the road in Texas, I know that every interaction that I have with the public, especially our young folks, is crucial, right? That positive experience can lead people to, how they feel about the police, or, if it's something they want to do, if they want to do that job, which, is really important now. We need all the people we can in law enforcement that really want to do that work and serve the community. And so I really encourage that, Tyrone, to focus on that, to take every opportunity you have to have great relations with the community. We're transitioning now. We used to used to consider community policing as a way to kind of engage with the public and build trust. And now we realize that it's really more about relations. So
Yes.
we're more into relational policing, and building this trusted network with our community members, with our city departments across the, to make sure that we're working together uh, on terms of creating a safe environment and ensuring public safety.
And to add to that, and I'm not going to add, you're going to add to it because I have an idea where I'm going with this. Obviously, in 27 years, you've had to build relationships. You already mentioned it, especially lieutenant. Some of the things you were able to build. Now you're using some of these relationships as assistant chief of police. You are over one of the more busier bureaus. Any bureau that has SWAT in it, you're gonna be spending money. It's just what it is. They have a lot of nice equipment because they need a lot of nice equipment. They need things that are gonna function when things are needed. So as we look at where you're at right now in your career, how do if we look back, let's say 3 years, 4 years prior to the pandemic, obviously there was a lot of different ways we handled policing. How do you believe we need to move forward, knowing some of the stuff you know now, like as far as 21st century policing goes? Like, how do you think we can move forward as an industry based on things that you're learning now?
Well, Michael, we face a number of challenges. Our department, we've probably lost quarter to a third of our personnel that we had prior to the murder of George Floyd. Um, and so as we move forward, it's just important that a lot of the things that we did traditionally as an agency when we had more people, we have to look at different alternatives to how we respond so we can still serve, the community. So you have that aspect of it, right? That slice of the pie. How are we going to still provide the same or better service with less officers? And so are we going to leverage, some of the options that are there to us and police differently using technology, which is a struggle that we have at times. We have ordinances and specific rules about how we can use technology. And so looking at ways to, if we can't be everywhere, in 2026, we have the um, FIFA World Cup. We're going to be one of the eight host
Wow.
cities.
Whew.
Um, it's going to be a struggle for us, to be everywhere. And so, can we rely on some technologies that we haven't used in the past, whether it's, you know, drones or surveillance cameras, networks? Like, we're going to have to work differently. Do we need to expand how we uh, our telephonic reporting or our online reporting capabilities, so we could still get the information we need and do it a way that serves the community. Since that's one less response to a non-emergency call, and we can kind of steer our officers to those emergency calls. Like, that is a big challenge. And then the other part I would say is just the nature of the young officer. You talk about the 1996 Deputy Davis back in back at that
Back in the
time.
day.
You
Back in the
know,
day
the,
day.
back in the day that we all started up the job. We know we're going to do our 30 years. We're going to get our plaque, and we're going to enjoy retirement. That is not the culture of the current generation. Let me just tell you right now, and I have this conversation with a lot of my friends that are my age or older. I think it's great that our young people are not afraid to work in a different area, or if they're not happy with their jobs doing something else. I know that sounds contradictory when we're really trying to recruit officers, but we have to be realistic. They are willing to do something different if the job that they're doing at the time, and particularly in law enforcement, does not work for them. And so it's imperative that we look at alternatives to how we um, make this a great place to work. So if there's alternatives to how we schedule, keeping the same work schedule that when there's maybe another work schedule that can give them, alternate weekends off or more times with their family, for example. Like that's things that are kind of important to a lot of our officers. So as leaders in 2023, we have to look at ways that we can uh, support our officers that are working here now, and hear what's important to them. So giving them opportunities to do work that may traditionally have been done by detectives, or things that they can now do out in the field. So they kind of have that vision of, hey, I want to stay here. I want to continue this job. I enjoyed doing this type of an investigation that's gonna make me want to stick around and become a detective and stay here with the Seattle Police Department, for example. Like that's, I think, where we need to go. We kind of need to run our police and government agencies closer to, uh, you know, the the other private sector industries who kind of allow, whether it's a alternate work schedule or bringing your dog to work. I mean,
Yeah.
I think you have to think outside the box, and not do what we've done traditionally and expect to keep young people we have today and keep them engaged and giving them meaningful work.
Oh, you're not going to keep them engaged. I can tell you that right now. If we keep doing the traditional methods of recruiting or retaining, you're not going to, because you're right. I mean, it's one of the things I speak on is generational awareness, and part of that is understanding that the new generations, while they love to work, they don't necessarily love to work at any particular organization or industry anymore. They're going to go to what suits their lifestyle. So, like you said, how do you come up with innovative strategies like bring your dog to work? I mean, I know that's a stretch in law enforcement, but you got to start looking at certain things to compete, because we already know there's no shortage of jobs out there, not anymore. So how do we have that different mindset? I think, like you're saying, starting to have those conversations and look at it, like even in Seattle, like, okay, we know you guys, like you said, you lost a third of your workforce. That's a lot of people. So if people don't understand what that really means, and any size agency or any size organization, if you lose a third of your people, it's really rough. So even if you have a 3-man department and you lose one of your officers or one of your staff, you're down to 2. That's a lot of burden. Now you multiply it by a couple of hundred, and that number really hurts. So you have to start looking at different ways to retain people. And I'm always more of a proponent of retaining versus recruiting, and that's simply because I feel like, and Tyrone, you can tell me if I'm wrong, I feel like everybody has a recruitment incentive nowadays. So, I mean, what's the difference in saying, all right, I'm going to spend 2 years at Idaho, then another 2 years at North Dakota, and you just keep jumping from incentive to incentive. So for me, it's like, what do we do for the retention side? And I know, but having different programs and having people buy into the culture is the most important things, because at the end, that's what people are going to want to stick around for. If they feel good, especially the newer generations, whether whoever has whatever opinions they do, it's what it is. And if you can't adapt, you're going to suffer. But understanding that you have to create those environments that's welcoming, create those atmospheres that people say, you know what, I love this job. Obviously, you're going to deal with bad days, because law enforcement, if you're in for 2 weeks, and that's me being optimistic, you're going to see something bad within that time. Now, obviously, it ranges, but you have to have something to kind of draw back to. So for you guys up there, and like from at least your experience, your leadership style, how do you motivate your troops? Like, how do you keep them motivated?
Yeah, and I think that's part of the retention. One of the things that I really focused on, especially when I was a watch commander, is really spending time with them, keeping them informed about
Mm,
what's going on, and the other part is getting their input. That's really important right now. I'm ex-military. I'm used to following orders, and I grew up from West Indian parents who, when they ask you, when they will not ask, when they tell you to do something, you do it, and
even
you
if it
don't
sounds like a
ask
question,
why.
even if it sounds
Yeah,
like a
even
question, it's still a statement.
so love you, mom, love you, dad. But that's kind of how I grew up, and that doesn't work anymore. They really, for them to value the work that they're doing, they want to know why the work that we're doing is important, and they want to be involved. So for me, it was important that if we had some sort of problem to tackle, I always ask my people, hey, look, do not complain. if unless you have a suggestion or a solution that you'd want to propose. That's my challenge to them every time. I think that's important for a number of reasons. It's not just because I don't want to hear them complain. That's not it at all. But it really challenges them to, people that are really doing the work to come up with suggestions about how we can make their job better and give them an opportunity to have some say in what they're doing. I think that's really important. And once they kind of do that and have that sort of buy-in, you can make progress. I would get sent assigned, maybe there's a community meeting in our area, and I would go to those a lot of times. Whenever I had an opportunity to send one of our officers to those meetings, it's amazing. Even some of the ones who are kind of a little bit more grumpier than the others, you know,
They're everywhere.
they go to that meeting and they come back and they're engaged. They had a great experience. They got to see that the community still loves and supports law enforcement, which is the truth. That's not, contrary to what people think. And, they're coming back and telling me about how we worked on this particular item. And one of the community members is actually going to come out on a ride along next Friday. And it's just great. They had that opportunity and you could just see that they had such a positive experience. And they also got to really work with those community members towards a solution to whatever problem they're tackling. And so that is very important. That's something I always try to encourage our officers to do is let's start working towards a solution to things that we can fix right now, things that we can control, and let's work to that and give them all the credit because they're the ones that really know what needs to be done. They're the smart ones. I try to tell them like I'm not the smartest person. I really rely on their experience, their expertise, what they're seeing on a day-to-day basis, and through that process, they get to work towards fixing the problem and they get invested. I think that's huge.
Every culture, especially every culture that has people that work within the mission, not for the mission, I think has that buy-in. So things that you're having them do is important. So Tyrone, I definitely take my hat off if I had a hat on. Take my hat off to you because I mean you're doing what I want people to hear. Like for anybody that's a leader or aspiring to be a leader, or you're just on a team, get people involved if you want them to buy in. Of course, you can tell them what to do. As you said in your last several years of leadership, of course you could just tell people what to do, and they're going to do it to some level. But if you want them to excel and to buy in and to work when you're not there, they have to be part of it. They have to have some sense of like belonging. And sometimes just bringing them in, like to some of the community meetings, for example, that may draw them in. Or if you're like, hey, does anybody have any suggestions for future training? Or does anybody have suggestions for our next cookout? It's crazy. I've used these same strategies in the past with different groups. And like you said, sometimes that person that seems grumpy or just upset, sometimes they've been my best participants because I had to find something they were interested in. Like they come to work and do their job great, but everybody has an interest. So if if you had one of your meetings and someone said, hey boss, how do you balance work-life balance? Like how do you unwind from all of this stuff you go through? What would you tell them?
Well, I would tell them that I'm very poor at balancing my work-life balance. Uh, I am definitely not the example to that, but I love taking care of my people. I love working. So for me, that's something that again I can improve on. But I also know what's valuable to them, and one of the ways I kind of figured that out, is I am very active. I walk around. I talk to people every chance I get, not about the job, but through having these meaningful conversations, I get to find out about what's important to them, about their families, about their hobbies, things that we may have in common, and things that I can learn from them. And through that process, I kind of know what's important to them. And so if there's an opportunity, whether it's a certain type of training or if they're on vacation, and I know that there's something that's important to them that's coming up. So I've signed them up for things before they even got back, and they're asking me when they come back, they're asking, hey, can I go to this particular training? And I'm like, oh, I already have you signed up, because I know from my conversations with them, both professional and personal, what's important to them. And when you do that, when they kind of know that you've really been listening to them and you're really paying attention to what's important to them, both on the job and outside of the job,
True.
that you get so much buy-in. It's a lot they're more inclined to do things that you ask them to do because you've built that trust with them and they know you're looking out for them. So, so by kind of having those conversations, I know what's important to them, and I just really try to encourage them to balance, what's important to work. If you need to, if you're coaching your kid's game, and we can work out a way where you can come in an hour later, let's do it. Like, we have to take care of the people we have, and we got to make sure that they manage that work-life balance, and because it's important to them. We really try to encourage family members whenever we talk to them as well. I kind of figure out what's important to them, to give them as find out what they like to do, and make sure that we have opportunities for them to do that. So we've done things in the past where we've had family members come to like it might be grilling or something, or doing a barbecue, for example, before the start of our shift or during the holidays. That's our opportunity to really get to meet their family, their friends, find out, I can share anecdotes of what I've heard about them, because a lot of times I've heard stories about them, and they're like, oh, right, now he's got a leader that
Yeah.
cares,
Yeah.
maybe
Yeah.
the
Let's
wife's
let's stay
looking
away
at the
from this one.
officer like,
Yeah.
but that's a that's that type of stuff is important and goes a long ways, and it shows that you care about them and their well-being, and that's important.
It's interesting as I listen, and at being on Zoom audio, I have to spend a lot of time listening to voice inflections and energy levels, and try to make sure I bring things out of people. And before the show, and people know we have the green room where we talk about a few things. You talked about being later in the day and being tired, but I don't know if you realize this before, Tyrone, but if you haven't, you gain energy through seeking good things from other people. So what I mean when I say that's like me, people say, like, what are my hobbies? I say, well, I like speaking. They was like, what are you talking about? That's stressful. Not to me. Professional speaking, having seminars, that makes me feel energetic. Now I'm not an extrovert by no means, but seeing that growth in people and seeing people change is what energizes me. And from what you're saying, you sound like you do the same thing, especially from the leadership side. When you reach out to people and you're finding out what drives them, what motivates them outside of work, not just inside of work, that gives you energy, and you can actually hear it in your voice. You can hear the change in pace, the level of energy that rises. And I'm guessing it's probably because you're picturing times when you're talking to some of your staff and you're uplifting them, and so it's okay if that is a level of of de-stressing. That's something that you're doing. I know it's weird that when you look at it like that, but I've come to terms for myself that when they say, what do you do for stress relief? I say, I go speak. And they're like, what? So I think, Tyrone, I think you should just look at a different angle. Like, what works for you to de-stress? Like, although you're working a lot, you're doing other things while you're at work, which is obviously part of your role as a leader. But those things, when you're reaching out to people and having those conversations, when you're on the ground with the troops, when you're walking the talk, leading by example, that's what's giving you energy. That's what's helping you realize why you do what you do every day. Now, obviously, in law enforcement, what we do, it's a calling. Obviously, that's been like that. I've heard that since day one, and they're right. However, having an additional calling in leadership in law enforcement is a whole nother beast, because now you're not just serving the public, but you're serving your people. And that sometimes can be overlooked, but really you do have a de-stressor, Tyrone. So I want you to realize that your de-stress is looking for the happiness in others, creating that environment. That's what drives you. And that's fine. If you told me you sat on a computer and looked at your budget numbers for 12 hours a day and you did no talking to other people, I would be a little concerned. I would be, but you're not saying that. You're saying you're reaching out to people throughout your day and throughout the week, and that's what's building you up. So for me, To hear that's actually exciting, because I know that's how I am too. Like, some people say they like to go fishing. I like to speak to others on topics like this, because that's the growth, that's the energy that, for me, that helps me get over things. So we're gonna pivot kind of hard right now, simply because there's something that I know you wanted to talk about, and I wanted to make sure I included it in the podcast because it's important to me, and it's not your normal thing that we talk about, like mental wellness or leadership development, but it's something that became very popular in 2020, 21, 22, and now it's kind of faded away. And that's diversity and inclusion in law enforcement. That's a topic that, it's like, we became very popular 2 years ago, and then all of a sudden it kind of faded away, and it shouldn't have faded away. But I feel like it has. So on your end, when you look at supporting diversity and inclusion in law enforcement, like, what angle are you coming from on that? Like, and what do you think needs to be done to get us back to some of those conversations?
Well, the first part is having those conversations and really talking about it. Our department, and there's a lot of people, again, that I work with, very smart people who have that same heart. They've really done a lot to, we've had standards in the past, for example, with our uniforms. And, recently we've changed the policy to allow for um, an earring or a beard, certain tattoos, depending, obviously they have to be professional in nature. They can't be inappropriate, allow certain hairstyles that, may be natural hairstyle to somebody's, background, or their ethnicity. Like, we've changed some of those standards, and, some of the people that I've worked with in the past, or some of the retired folks, have really hard time with that. They're used to having certain grooming standards that they were accustomed to. But it's important now more than ever, as we talk about retention again, and, other agencies who are doing the same thing, that really give those officers an opportunity to show their individuality, to really support, their culture. And if there's a way that they can do that and it still looks professional, and it still says a lot about them personally, like, we need to give officer those opportunities. And so, we have a lot of veterans who kind of struggle with that. But as we kind of move into the 21st century and we're kind of forward thinking, you know, looking for those opportunities to give officers a chance to show their individuality rather, is imperative right now. That means a lot. And so that that's one of the things we really strive for doing as an agency, and I think we're doing a better job of that moving forward. And we'll continue to look for ways to do that. We did a number of YouTube videos, for example, where officers got one, for example, where officers got to show off their tattoos and what these tattoos meant to them personally. A lot of people see tattoos and they just think it's art and it's something they want to do to look cool. But for a lot of those people, those tattoos have meaning to them. Explains their why, and in terms of who they are and why they do the job that they do, or show what's important to them in their personal lives. And we should honor that and not shy away from that.
And you're right. It's important to promote it. Like you said, just starting off, just having a conversation of what are we doing to support diversity and inclusion? Like where does that start? And like you said, you're right. I mean, back when I started in 05, facial hair was pretty much a no-no, in a sense. Like if you had a mustache, it had to be a certain length. I couldn't grow facial hair, so it didn't really matter to me, to be honest with you. But
I'm with you.
for the folks that could grow it, they were a little upset. But like me, I was like, oh, it's something. I mean, especially when I was 19, 20, I can get away without shaving for like 3 to 4 days at least. And even on that 4th and 5th day, like I didn't really have anything, but I just shaved it out of principle. Now I have to shave every day. Things still don't grow everywhere on my face, but you're right. Just simply having that option, allowing people to highlight their tattoos, because you're right, they have a lot of meaning to certain people. And I know we look at it as if like, oh, they just wanted to put that on their skin? Well, some people have really good reasons. Some people have no reason whatsoever. Let's not rule that out. I'm not saying every reason's good to have some tattoos, but some people have some really personal meaning behind it. So the fact that you guys are starting to promote that is really good. The facial hair thing's good. Allowing hairstyles, you're right. That's something else that's been newer. I remember just, hey, you need to be clean cut, or if you have something that can't go over your ears or something like that. And now you see people with braids, dreads, longer hair,
Right.
and as long as it's neat, you're right. I've seen some amazing designs in hair that look better than people that just had their hair combed back. And I'm like, yep, it's cool that person has braids or dreads, or they have even different colors up to a point, because it does look really good if it's done correctly, if it's done professionally or by someone that knows what they're doing. So you're right, just the whole diversity inclusion, I believe that it's going to help us with recruiting, and well, especially retention, because you have people that can now be more themselves versus hiding who they are. And I think no, I think not. I can't. Let me take that word away. I know one of the things I talk about is people knowing who they are. And when you know who you are, when you face these tough times in law enforcement, it's more manageable to overcome them. But when you're hiding behind your uniform, your badge, or you're shielding who you are, when you hit the wall, it's hard to overcome things. So when we're looking at what you guys are doing, like you said, with your YouTube page and all that stuff, and I got a small chance to glance at it, and it seems like you almost like you guys are doing like highlights and everything, which is really good. I think that's where we need to be at with promoting people as people, not just saying that there's certain things they can't do, but things that they can do. So when you guys started to do like the different like promotions of, like, let's say the tattoos, the videos, like how did you see your culture shift at that time?
In terms of the officers that are here now, it's been great. It's been very positive. You think about this, Michael. Maybe you were from a certain descent and you have a certain hairstyle that's unique to a particular group.
Mm-hmm.
And through that, you go to a call for service or you work a community event where you maybe
Mm-hmm.
actually have a chance to talk to someone, maybe someone from that same culture. And now instead of the conversation just being about, the business of the officer, you have that conversation piece. Oh, they let you wear your hair that way. Are you from this particular culture? Yes, I am too. That may start the conversation and give them the opportunity need to say, hey, look, I would be accepted. Maybe I want to do this line of work, and I can support uh, not just the city, but my community as well, and represent them. Like, I think that's what's important. You may, that tattoo may start a conversation that is on a level that is not just about work or profession, but they can actually have this human interaction, between say an officer and a community member, during, based on, your hairstyle or based on the tattoo or based on, whatever makes them unique. And so anytime you have to look at it, if you look at it through that lens, to me, it makes perfect sense. That's kind of where we need to go moving forward. I think the agencies that are going to be open to that are going to find that they're going to have a larger pool of qualified people that want to do the job and really want to represent, the city and the community that they serve.
No, you're right. One of my cousins, first cousin at that, no, second cousin. He, coming out of high school, he had dreads, and back in the day, you would look at someone like that, and you would have a perception about them. And
Right.
just because you just had a perception, you think they were maybe into drugs, or they might have been into crime, or they couldn't think. This guy went to Harvard on a full scholarship. So obviously, like you said, you start looking at the different things with the agencies. You take that same approach, like, okay, what are we missing? Because we have this perceived notion of maybe the way they wear their hair, or maybe their tattoos, or maybe some of the lingo they use. Maybe you have this preconceived notion, and you're turning people away. Come to find out that they are hell of officers. They're people that are ready to run through the burning building in the polyester uniforms because they just want to save lives. But you turned them away because you thought that look meant something else. So I agree.
Or you
The
made them feel that they wouldn't be accepted because of that, right? And so now we're
correct.
changing it to where, no, you're accepted. Come as you are. We'll meet you where we need to meet you. Again, as long as you're professional and you keep everything tidy and within our standards, that that's totally appropriate. And again, it goes back to me, having that interaction with that trooper, the littlest positive interaction between any of our officers and, potential candidates that want to come and work for our department. Like, you got to value every single instance. I wish I knew who that trooper was. I could go back and thank them for giving me the idea to, you know, send me towards a career that has been so valuable to me, to my family that I support. And, it's really just been enriching and just a great experience to be able to serve. So, those interactions, they matter. And, being able to be inclusive, like it pays dividends exponentially down the road.
It does. I mean, so you're right. And that's why this is why I had that hard pivot earlier, Tyrone, because I knew this is a topic that I've obviously I do on my podcast, and that was something that I hadn't remembered talking about in a while. And I know when you mentioned that that's something you might want to discuss, I was like, you know what? We haven't discussed diversity and inclusion because it's not, lack of better terms, it's not sexy right now. It's not what the hype things that society has going on. So, and it ain't just law enforcement, a whole bunch of agencies. I remember people used to hire diversity inclusion officers or diversity type of whatever. They had they had all types of names for them. But for a while they were hiring those. Do you remember that time, Tyrone, when people were just hiring officers with that title? Not police officers, just positions.
No, absolutely. And it's like, again, it's all, probably centered around recruitment and making sure they're comfortable. But yeah, and I think now, to your point, when they're hiring people now, we really got to realize that each and every officer has an opportunity to show that. We don't have to have a special officer that does that type of work, or they can do it and maybe, open the eyes of the people that you have. But, that's important. And I do remember a lot of agencies go into that. We recently hired uh, a non-sworn person that would kind of help assist us in that because, yeah, we're doing a good job with it, but there's still ways we can improve, right? We always want to continue to think and move forward and really show that, we're an agency and that the people that we have working for us, both sworn and non-sworn, are a reflection of the community that they serve.
Yeah, you're right. It's people will open up a lot more when they at least perceive that you have similar interests as them. I mean, and it's true. But even when it comes to being in your leadership role, Tyrone, like the fact that when you're on the ground with them, that's relatable to them as well. Versus because at some point, and you've already experienced it already, I'm sure you've had to deliver that order or give that interesting directive that you knew wasn't gonna on the surface be perceived well. However, the fact that you're out there gave you a little bit more credibility because they're like, you know what, we understand that. And reasonable people with that, that's why let me clarify, let me emphasize, reasonable people realize that there's some things that you have to do the higher you go in leadership. And there's bigger pictures. And sometimes you don't have time to explain, but the fact that you're out there being relatable, that goes a far way. And the same thing with diversity and inclusion. You want people to relate to each other. You want them to relate, to open up, because if they feel like you're on two different sides of the fence all the time, they're just not gonna believe they have you have their best interests in mind.
Absolutely. It's amazing how, many of our officers would comment, oh, it's great to have a commander and now, and, as an assistant chief and executive who shows up at a scene. I've told, my SWAT team, for example, or, I'm going to come out to scenes when I have an opportunity. There's no way I can, really have the credibility if I'm sitting, in my top floor office. It's important that I'm at events, that I'm at their call outs, or I'm out, working a night shift occasionally, and showing up to scenes and just asking them, what they need, how can I support them, you know, that goes a long way. Yeah, absolutely. I people have to really spend time. If you're going to lead, you really have to, from an executive position especially, you're really going to have to spend time out in the field, having those conversations, seeing what they need, getting feedback, from officers, from your supervisors. Like, that's very important, because it's hard to make those decisions or argue for things on their behalf, if you don't have those conversations and find out what's important to them. And then again, if, like you said, if to give those orders, that's where your credibility comes in. That's one of the things I really, um, sold, as why I thought I'd be a good, choice for being an assistant chief. I'm not too far removed from working side by side with people, having those
Hmm.
conversations, and I feel very comfortable going across the street to City Hall and talking to folks, or going to a roll call and talking to officers because I stay engaged.
Yeah, yeah, and you have to, and I think it's important for people listening. Like, hey, the higher, and especially the higher you go, the more intentional you have to be about it, because you just don't have as many opportunities. Because if you're stuck working on a budget, that's going to take a lot of work, especially the bigger budgets at that. So you have to find yourself intentionally going out there and meeting people. And sometimes if you're not in leadership role, let's say you're an entry level officer or you're entry level in your position, when you see these leaders coming out walking, hey, talk to them, be open with them, let them know, like, especially if you see the ones that are consistently being out there, like, hey, this is what's going on, this is how I want to make it better. Don't hide your thoughts and your opinions, because there people are out there for a reason. They're walking the beat, so to speak, but through the hallways and on patrol, because that you have their Tyrone Davises out there that want to hear what's going on to make the agency better, because ultimately that's what it's about. So as we're coming to an end and wrap it up, um, Tyrone, if someone wanted to reach out to you, if someone said, man, we love this podcast and we love what you've been able to talk about tonight, but we just want to hear more from you, what would be the best way for someone to connect with you?
Yeah, you can find me easily on LinkedIn. That's probably the easiest or most accessible way to reach out to me. I like hearing from people. I did get to go to, the FBI National Academy last spring and connect with, leaders from all around. And, through some of those, that's just one network of a couple that I'm a part of. And I really enjoy, helping not just people in our area, but, across the U.S. If they want to figure out how, we're tackling a certain issue, I like to share my time with them. I've done that recently, um, and so, conversely, I like to be able to reach out to people as well. So LinkedIn is definitely the easiest way to get a hold of me. Don't hesitate to reach out. I love talking anything that has to do with leadership and everything that has to do with law enforcement.
And he's right, folks. That FBI National Academy group, I actually spoke at their conference last month in Denver, and what he said is just a small snippet of how much they love to train in leadership and network. But yeah, definitely reach out to them, guys. I mean, y'all, I know there's a lot of misperceptions of Seattle PD, and you guys are here, and this is somebody in the flesh. This is somebody that's actually been in it. This isn't a hypothetical situation, and you hear how much joy he has in still building people, even with all the stuff that went on up there. So that shows you guys that there's a human behind the badge. There's a human in uniform that wants to see his people grow, and he wants to see the community get better. So make sure you guys reach out to him with any questions or just even positive comments. Just say, hey man, keep it going, because we know we really don't get enough of that in law enforcement. And sometimes just hearing, hey man, you're doing a good job goes a far way.
Yeah, absolutely, Michael. Real quick anecdote.
Go ahead.
One of the best things I've got to do in my job, is I've filled in several times for the chief at the police academy graduation. First of all, can I tell you how much fun that is to see officers that are excited, that are stepping up to the challenge and willing to do this job? That's such a great job. Getting to, hand them their graduation certificate and swear them in. Like it really is by far the most fun thing. And I always encourage those officers, hey, if, you see me out, please say hi. I like to see their progress. Like having leaders engaging with officers, you start at the first chance you get, whether it's at even if it's at the academy, and just keeping engaged with them. Like I think that's really where the joy comes in the job, and really showing them that you care right at the gate, and that you're consistent with that you're going to talk to them, whether it's 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and find out what makes them tick, and give them opportunities for meaningful work. That's joy. That brings them joy.
Yeah, you're right. I can remember, not maybe my police officer time, but some of them over the last 10 years, I remember some of the initial leaders that took that time and spoke to me and took that time to make sure I was transitioning well into different like positions. And then you're right, it goes far. I mean, some of them I still speak to today, which is crazy. But it's because of, like, you're right, going out the way, and it's exciting the higher you go to still see that fire other people, because it's just, I don't know how to explain it. It's just, if you've not been in that position to be able to receive it as far as the leader goes, go out there and talk to your people. And just go out there and just experience, especially if you don't know them. Go out there and see what they're thinking about. Just see what their dreams are. See what motivates them. Understand their goals. All those things will help you build relationships with them. And as we mentioned early on in the show, relationship building is extremely important for everything you do. So, Tyrone, what final words do you have for the audience?
I just want to thank you, Michael, for this opportunity to kind of share. We talked before this briefly, and I felt like I still only talked about 40% of the things I wanted to share. In terms of working with the community. I mean, it's great that you're doing this podcast. Any chance we get to, and we being law enforcement, get to share with the community what makes us tick, what make us, humanizes us, because a lot of times, the public just see us in this uniform. It's hard for them to see the person that is inside of that uniform. Um, you know, it's a good opportunity with this podcast to kind of share with your guests, or share your guests with the community, rather, in terms of what makes them tick. I think that helps with community engagement and relationship between law enforcement and community. So thank you for doing what you're doing, and I appreciate the opportunity.
You're welcome. And that's what it's about. It's really just about sharing what we do and showing people that, yes, we have there's somebody there. There's a person there. It ain't just a shell. It ain't just nobody, nothing. It ain't like that mouse that's falling off the wheel. That's not, no, there's a mouse running very fast in all the wheels that we have in our head, guys. So it's definitely something that we want to share. And I do want the community to be able to hear stuff like this. I want our peers, our naysayers, our affirmers, everybody to understand that this is where we're trying to go with shows like mine, because we need more. We need people to believe what we're doing, because it's hard enough that we go through tough calls. It's hard enough that we see very violent things, but we don't need to downplay our worth to justify other people's wrong perception of us. And that's things that I try to show. I'm like, hey guys, we have good people in our industry. Let's promote them. Let's show what we have going along nationwide, internationally, because this is how we bring people to the field and keep them here, because there's so many negative voices on the outside that can draw you away from what your calling is. And I want to make sure at least there's one voice, two voices, three voices, whatever, that's on the podcast that can at least give people some more hope. So, Tyrone, thank you. I appreciate you taking the time being on the show. Listeners, I thank you once again. You guys are always amazing. And as we continue to build momentum in this show, I love the feedback that I get. I love the texts. I love the emails. I love the messages on LinkedIn, because it shows me social proof that we're getting the message along. And that's one of the things that we're going to accomplish. We're going to increase the positive visibility of the industry, and it's going to take each of us to do it. So thank you guys. Thank you for tuning in. Hopefully you guys have a great day. And if you don't have a great day, listen to this podcast. Listen to it again. You're going to find some good nuggets in here from Tyrone that I didn't know about until he started telling me. But definitely, guys, listen to it, and we hope to hear about some of your testimonies that you have from listening to this podcast. And if you guys have any positive things you want me to pass on to Tyrone later on, let me know. I'll be more than happy to do it, because this is the field that we're in. We're in a field to make each other better. So thank you once again, guys. You guys have a great time, and I will see you guys on the next podcast.
You've been listening to the LEO First Podcast. Michael has been in law enforcement since 2005. He's worked for 3 law enforcement agencies in 3 different states. He's a professional speaker who travels the country teaching about leadership development and self-awareness. And he's the author of a book called Greatness Beyond the Badge: The 3 Key Principles for Self-Awareness. It's Michael's passion to bring law enforcement members' stories to the front, so you get the real and raw take. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review. And we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hook up with Michael on YouTube, Instagram, and LinkedIn at Michael Laidler, on Twitter at Michael A. Laidler, on Facebook at Michael Laidler Leadership. Send an email to michael@michaelalaidler.com and hit the website at michaelalaidler.com. See you next time on the LEO First Podcast.
Like that, I'm going to be leaving a note on a vehicle driving in the remote.